Yeah, and the interesting thing here that I see is even more so in RevOps than in the previous model of sales ops or marketing ops or CS ops. So RevOps is looking at the whole funnel, the whole customer journey, right? So definitely there are some handshakes along the way. And by design, it's looking across multiple functions, right? That's why I believe we are well positioned to either be part of those cross-functional initiatives or even lead those initiatives.
Welcome to RevOps Rockstars, in pursuit of unicorns. I'm David Carnes.
And I'm Jarin Chu. Join us as we interview RevOps leaders to explore the challenges they have faced, the biggest lessons they've learned, and what they think makes a RevOps rockstar.
This show is brought to you by OpFocus, on a mission to help companies run their businesses better by letting you focus on growth while we scale your operations. Let's get this show on the road. Today's guest on the podcast is a global RevOps leader. He's a dad, and he's also an amateur YouTuber who's based in Barcelona. He has 15 years of experience in global organizations. He's the VP of Revenue Operations at DocPlanner. Our guest today is Gabriel Rustice. Welcome, Gabriel.
Thank you very much, Dave. Such a pleasure to be here. What you guys are doing here is amazing. And I'm just honored to be, alongside such great names that you guys have in the episode. So I hope I can contribute with my 2 cents here.
Gabriel, we're really excited to pick your brain today because you've not only led RevOps, you've led sales ops, you're very involved in various communities related to RevOps and sales ops. You've got tons of experience kind of around the globe. As you reflect back on your current role and your prior roles, what do you think is something in RevOps that you kind of had to learn the hard way?
Great question. So definitely there's been more than one mistake that I've done, that I've made along my career. So I'll give you 2. So one would be busy is not the same as effective, right? And the second one is, you have to understand the balance between technical and business. So for the first one, I've done a number of, projects and tasks and items throughout my career that simply did not, lead to any outcomes in terms of business. This is a common flaw that I see in RevOps. Sometimes we're way too busy doing all sorts of things that ultimately doesn't affect the bottom line of the company. And I'm guilty of that, right? So definitely you have to be able to differentiate a noise from a signal and really, focus on what's going to bring an impact to the company. The second one for me particularly is it's so interesting to see people in RevOps. They come typically from either business-related roles or human-ish related roles or more technical side of the house. I myself came from this more technical side of the house, meaning CRM, tech stack, and BI. And one thing that I had to learn that the hard way was actually finding that balance, right? So you have to be able to really understand your flaws and really, create an action plan to address that. So whether that is speaking to reps and understanding how they are speaking to clients and actually visiting clients, if you're lacking that part of your skill set, or the opposite, maybe you're previously, you were a salesperson or a CS person or something completely unrelated to the commercial side of the business, but still in this more human side. And then you have to be able to then acquire some at least basic knowledge on the technical infrastructure, because that's what makes our function unique and so valuable.
Those are 2 really, really powerful takeaways. And I think probably applicable for folks outside of RevOps as well. With the first one that you mentioned, busy is not the same as effective. I feel like there's probably a way you've come to develop to understand, how do I assess if this is busy work? And if I am doing busy work, how do I transition out of just doing busy work and doing more effective work? Can you share a little bit about your process on how you do that?
For sure. Yeah. So definitely there's multiple, let's say, methodologies out there where you can, evaluate in a matrix, effort versus impact and that kind of stuff. For me personally, it is as simple as sitting down with whoever I report to. So whether that's the COO, one of the founders of the company, and then really align expectations on, hey, we have 1,000 things to do. And typically that's true. I'm not joking. And then what here is aligned with the goals of the company, right? So really having that conversation understanding that what I'm focusing on, what my precious time is being put into, is actually aligned to that. So that for me has been like, there's no magic, secret here. It's just doing that, taking that conversation and then realigning my OKR or whatever that is.
And do you have the habit of doing that, say on a quarterly basis, or how frequently do you do that, a strategic assessment of yourself and your team in relation to the objectives?
This is something I personally have done throughout my whole career, sort of proactively. So always like putting, even to a certain extent, a little bit of an exaggeration, like putting calendar invites throughout the whole year, with my manager or VP or founder again, to really have those conversations. So typically it's quarterly. So quarterly I sit down, have that planning first myself, then the alignment conversation, and then make the adjustments, and off we go. And then by the end of the quarter, the same thing in terms of looking back.
Wow. I'm feeling very inspired already, Gabriel, because I am in the same position of feeling like there's way too many things to do and way too many opportunities, but wanting to be critical about where we spend, the precious however many hours we spend at work every day.
It touched on something very interesting, Jarin, which is the fact that a lot of things, maybe not everything, but a lot of things in RevOps can be applicable to other people. So that's a very good insight.
So Gabriel, your title is VP of Revenue Operations. What does that entail at DocPlanner?
Excellent question. So if you ask the same question, I'm sure you guys have done that to 100 people, 1,000 people, you're gonna probably get different answers. So for us at DocPlanner specifically, what that means is making sure that we have, the best of the best, customer-facing reps, right? And making sure that is driving the right level of productivity so that we can meet our revenue targets. So in the case of DocPlanner specifically, unlike a few different companies, RevOps is composed of functions that support customer-facing reps. So that's going to be sales and CS. In our particular case, and I know this is a debate going on in a market of RevOps. In our case, we do not have marketing ops, as part of this umbrella. At least formally, speaking of like organizational design. However, there is a strong informal alignment that we do throughout a project that we call the customer journey.
So you mentioned hitting revenue targets. I'm curious, what are the ways that you measure success in the RevOps role?
Yeah, for me, really, this is an interesting topic, and I for sure do not have the right answer here. And I'm super keen always to talk to people about the topic. For me, it comes down to three things. That's my perspective. One of them is I strongly believe that RevOps needs to be tied to bottom line revenues. So meaning quota attainment or just the revenue targets itself. Even though we do not carry quota, even though we're not the ones actually in the front line, I think that's a way to make sure we're accountable. And again, at the end of the day, going back to my first point, that we are moving the needle. We're not just focusing on busy items that do not make an impact. So for me, there's an element of that. Going even a bit further, I'm a big fan of having, depending on the organization, if that's the case, of having the variable comp of RevOps tied to revenue numbers. Then the second and third, so there's two other metrics that I believe that measure the success. The second is the indirect impact the more direct the impact that we have, which is projects. So basically the way that we handle this at DocPlanner is every single quarter we have an OKR type of document that we create. We have a different naming for it. And there typically we put the initiatives and the indicators associated with those initiatives. So if we really achieve the goals of delivering those projects, whether that's a CRM implementation or migration, or whether it could be related to building a sales pitch or creating a one view of the world, that is how we measure the progress towards target there. And then the final one is going to be an interesting one that I've never had in my whole career, but here at DocPlanner we also pay attention to that, which is more related to the support side of the house. So making sure that we deliver great service to our internal stakeholders. So we serve sales, we serve customer success. So one of the things that we do, for instance, is tracking an SLA for the requests that come in through our intake system. as well as an NPS. So are they happy with the service that we provide? Do they see value? Are we acting fast enough to deliver those projects and tasks?
Well, that's fascinating. And, I don't know what percentage of RevOps leaders that we've spoken to would say that there is any form of variable comp for folks in their team. So I think that's very exciting. I love what you've described about tracking the service level agreements and even going so far as to having an NPS score. With regard to the variable comp, I just, part of me wonders, you're a global organization, you have staff all around the planet. Just wondering how HR guidelines and whatnot, HR expectations around the world react to that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Yeah. Due to the stage of the company, because DocPlanner is doing this scale up motion, we have not yet structured that out. But in previous companies that I worked at, there was an element, at least for the management and leadership teams, there was this, element of variable plus fixed, component associated there.
I'm interested in following on David's line of questions around exploring a bit about the team and the team that you have managed globally. DocPlanner has about 2,400 employees around the world. You've raised, I think, most recently in May 2019, 86 million in a Series E, a very mature company. What is the size of the RevOps team that you've worked with or you're managing currently, and how does that distribute around the different regions?
Such a good question, Jarin. And for me in particular, this is something that when I speak to people in RevOps, we share our pains and our issues. And one of the things that always comes up is that we don't have enough resources. We don't have enough people, right? And I myself experienced that in the past, like being the one Swiss Army knife guy fighting against all systems. When I joined DocPlanner, that was a strong transition to me, because then I took over a global organization that has over 60 people just in RevOps. So it's very interesting because, one, we have this international sort of global to local dynamics that, I've never experienced that before. So for me, has been a major learning in my career so far. And then second, it's less about not having resources now. I cannot complain about that. Is how do we make that happen in a way that it brings value to the company? So hope that answers the question there.
Yeah, and what's really cool is most people probably dream of being able to manage a RevOps team of 60 or more. Help me understand, how is your RevOps function structured, and how does that distribute kind of across the regions that you're in?
Good question. So one thing that is not under RevOps at DocPlanner is the tech stack or tools team. So we do have a dedicated global team that handles that. Some organizations have this combined. I've seen some cases where it's separate. They're the sort of developers and admins, side of the house. So RevOps at DocPlanner, we have a global and a local structure. So global means the people who are responsible for keeping like the consistency across all countries. So I have a global sales operations unit, a small team there. I have a global customer ops team. And then in each of the countries, we have people boots on the ground with the same, distribution there. So sales ops and customer ops there. And then basically, organizationally speaking, we have a few different functions. So we have, one bucket, which is enablement, right? Which is a recent, let's say, nascent function at DocPlanner that we're still building out. We have then, data quality, analytics, budgeting and forecasting, that side of the house. We have then more the project managers, and this is also something that I'm instilling as a new initiative in the company. And then we have more the support functions, so the frontline support to the sales reps there.
Wow, I'm keeping track here, and you've mentioned a whole bunch of functions locally. You've mentioned kind of what sounds like strategy units at the global level for sales ops and customer ops. When it comes to coordinating, based on what, let's say, the folks locally have heard from the frontline sales reps, and then making sure that that's aligned at the global strategy level, how are you coordinating between the teams, making sure that local feedback is incorporated, making sure that the company objective is still properly distributed? How are you kind of incorporating all of this data that you're collecting in your teams?
Yeah, and by far and away, this is the main topic for at least the past year of 22, and now we're kicking off 2023, is that alignment, right? So on the one hand, you have this interesting aspect of a global company where people speak different languages. Not necessarily everybody speaks English, right? And you also have cultural nuances into play here, which ultimately affect, the alignment aspect. So it's not as easy to get, some changes done or to get some items pushed, across business lines or across countries there. This is for sure a work in progress with DocPlanner. So to put a little bit of history into context here, previously to me joining the company, there was simply no global RevOps, right? So the company, the last couple of years, has definitely made a shift into profitability, into scalability, right? And the company has been hiring the best execs out there in the market. And as part of that, it was a smart decision, I should say, to decide to build global RevOps. So as soon as I joined, then I took over those existing functions from each country. And then, it's a journey where we're building that out. In terms of alignment, for me, it starts with the vision. So if people don't know what to expect and where we're going with, it's very hard to then, have alignment. So first things first, having that vision built, communicated, and really ensure that people understand it, which, is not always the case. Sometimes you think you have a great vision and that people understood, but it may be that they're not necessarily aligned with it. So really making sure you have constant, all hands meetings, feedback, make sure that you're communicating that in a very simple way is one thing. And then the second thing is cadence, and then building a framework for collaboration, right? So as part of this setup of having global and local teams, there are for sure these alignment meetings that we do weekly for sales ops, and then they're going to gather people from all countries and then cover the main topics. In the same way, one thing that is very interesting at our company is that we are learning from the countries, stuff that we didn't know, stuff that we think we know it, but we get it wrong, right? So that's the feedback loop. And the beauty of it is that locally we run much faster, right? So globally it's like this consistency and getting the structure into place, and that's amazing. That's what we need at this stage of the company. However, we cannot just overlook the value of acting quickly and learning and making changes happen. And that is mostly happening today locally in each of the countries. And then we are taking that and replicating to the other markets.
Wow, I'm feeling like I'm getting a masterclass front row here on how to manage a global organization. I, in particular, wonder about whether you've had specific learnings around how change management is different in specific regions that you're operating in. Curious if you've got any stories or specific instances that you found like, wow, that's a huge learning lesson for me to say, as a leader, this is something I need to be aware of because I have these teams in the different time zones and cultures.
Yeah, that's definitely, not only at DocPlanner, but, throughout my career, something that it is a big elephant, in the room that we cannot overlook is like, you have to make sure that you have buy-in from different functions or different markets. And I definitely see that happening, in my current role. One of the things that I've seen happening specifically in my role is as we started to act against our vision. So basically the vision is we have to unify the teams. We have to have this consistency, function that delivers, helps us delivers the revenue targets. As part of that major project was let's get a new CRM into place. So currently we are migrating from HubSpot to Salesforce. That's one of the main initiatives in the company, and by far and away, no small task in front of us. And then everybody is bought into the concept, but when it gets to actually executing it, then there's always these things that you run into, which are, actually this is my way of doing things. So for me, one of the key things here is make sure that you have sort of a multi-thread buy-in. So think of it from a sales point of view. In enterprise, typically this is a strategy that account managers use. Like you have to multi-thread to make sure that the multi-stakeholders, you're not blindsided, everybody's bought in, and then you can get to the over the finish line. For me in RevOps, it's the same. I cannot just go to the countries and then get them on my side and then explain the value. Hey, we're doing this, and this is going to help us. This is going to help you. This is going to help the company, without having aligned with the country leadership, without having aligned with the function leadership, and vice versa. If I simply come top to down and then I say, guys, this is the value, and then I don't spend enough effort doing the basics of leadership, like spending time with the team and inspiring them, and making sure that they see me as a human being, I know that's not going to help us, right? So for me, that's the funny thing I've been experiencing here at DocPlanner, and definitely some nice stories there.
Wow, I love how it all comes back down to the basics. Being able to spend time together, building trust within and between teams, building trust in you as a leader. Those are really essential pieces to helping bridge whatever potential friction or misunderstandings or misassumptions that might come through when you have such a diverse and multi-country team.
Right on.
You mentioned really quickly that you've got some big initiatives cooking when it comes to getting work done, the execution piece, or maybe there's some strategy in it involved as well. How do you determine the right balance of what do you do in-house? What do you outsource maybe to some trusted contractors or consultants? Maybe what do you even offshore if you do that?
Great question. And for this point particularly, there is a cultural aspect of global/international organizations here, which is the fact that having transitioned from working at American companies and Canadian companies my whole life to a Polish company, I ran into this. Europeans/Polish people, I'll generalize here for sure. They are more reticent in terms of outsourcing, right? In our case, one more component to this is that we actually have, a lot of resources, as we were previously discussing. So the majority of the things that we can do and that we should do, we're going to take those internally in the context of this company, DocPlanner, right? And then we're going to outsource if really we don't have a way of doing it. So really, we are going to outsource the arms and the legs of the operational work that has to be done.
Okay, so if you're doing everything in-house, you must be hiring. If you are, what are the kinds of roles you're looking for, and where can they find out more about the positions that are available?
Good question. I am definitely looking for some talented people. In particular, just to name a few, I'm looking for a global sales operations analyst. So as part of that global function that I mentioned before, looking as well for a couple of leadership positions in RevOps in a couple of countries, Brazil and Poland. And then there's more roles. People can just go to docplanner.com/careers. There's a slew of roles being posted there for sure.
Wow, super cool. That's very exciting to hear about all the hiring. So you mentioned the CRM migration, and when thinking of that, I'm thinking of the trend that we're seeing of folks in RevOps, the RevOps leaders owning very large cross-functional corporate level initiatives. These could be things like M&A, could be rolling out product-led growth. Does your team, do you have a mandate to drive big changes within the organization like that?
Oh, definitely. Yes. For me, this is where we in ops, we excel, right? So my comfort zone is sort of that discomfort of, cross-functional. There's a number of initiatives that, RevOps where I've been involved throughout my career. Some of them related to just M&A. So always when there's an acquisition, RevOps tends to be, by the nature of the role, to take over a more cross-functional aspect of the project. Specifically within DocPlanner, we have a cross-functional initiative called the customer journey, which, as the name says, it's all about mapping out the entire customer journey, all of the touch points along the way. What are the data needs that we have to build the future state CRM? Right? And that involves people from data warehouse, from BI, from sales ops, from customer ops, from sales, from marketing, and from finance, right? And then we are in this intersection, like leading the initiative there. happy to give more examples, but this is my kind of my everyday bread.
I'm so glad to hear it, and it's just definitely a trend that we're seeing of ownership of these massive initiatives, because these RevOps teams can get stuff done, can prioritize the work, divvy up the work, and roll up their sleeves and get it done.
Yeah, and the interesting thing here that I see is even more so in RevOps than the previous model of sales ops or marketing ops or CS ops. So RevOps is looking at the whole funnel, the whole customer journey, right? So definitely there are some handshakes along the way. And by design, it's looking across multiple functions, right? That's why I believe we are well positioned to either be part of those cross-functional initiatives or even lead those initiatives.
That's such a good point. So I'd love to shift to talking about technology for a few moments. Is there a tech stack tool that you could not live without?
Good question, tricky question. I love this one. For me personally, the simplest one that gets the job done is the best one in my opinion. Oftentimes we are caught up by the shiny tool syndrome. Like we see this all the time. For me, more complexity, either organizational complexity or technology complexity, does not help in terms of scalability. That being said, I will name the fact that in terms of CRM, which is the foundation of a tech stack, I've worked with the main ones out there. So Salesforce, HubSpot, Microsoft Dynamics. For me, it's less about the tool and more about how you design it. If you design it properly, and if you have a person who really understands the ins and outs of it and is good at governing it, then it's going to go well. But I would say that people oftentimes overlook Microsoft Dynamics. There's a lot of words on Salesforce and HubSpot, which are amazing tools, and we are using both of those currently at DocPlanner. Microsoft Dynamics, just something that I continue to hear out there within the RevOps circle, is like not a great tool because it's from Microsoft, so user experience is not great. I think people should revisit that. I've used that a lot, and it's such an amazing tool. Outside of that, for me, keeping it simple would be you have to have a great BI tool to have visibility into the customer data. And we know that CRM is not that tool. Like, no matter how great CRMs are, or no matter how great, is your architecture of it, is not meant to be that tool. So we have to have a great BI tool. I personally like very much, Power BI, but again, any other BI tool can get the job done. And then finally, depending on your business, this is not applicable to all companies, but some of it is a great sales engagement platform. Because a lot of the pain that we see in visibility of customer data is the fact that you have to constantly bug reps to enter their activity in the CRM. And this tool, first of all, is designed, I think it's one of the few tools in the in the universe of tech stack that is actually designed for reps. So that's an amazing selling point. And secondly, it automates the whole activity, and they don't have to worry about it, right? So for me, that would be an ideal. We have to have it.
Wow, you've shared a lot right there. As somebody who just finished the first draft of a book on Salesforce reports and dashboards, I actually agree with you wholeheartedly that we can only go so far with those out of the box reporting tools, and we really need a BI. And we've seen for years that companies almost wait too long to invest in a proper tool. You mentioned having data warehouse. You mentioned BI earlier. If you could have your pick of a tool to have an at-a-glance view of the business, what would you seek as far as BI?
Yeah, for me, it would be between Power BI and Tableau. I think those are market leaders and definitely easy to use. And sometimes you do not even need to have a data warehouse infrastructure in between, because it's the modern BI infrastructure. It's built in that way that end users can just click and drag things around and get the job done.
And I think that's so important. You started off talking about the simplest tool to get the job done. And I think as so many of the organizations that we work with are scaling so quickly, DocPlanner's grown 60% headcount across the last few years. So you guys are growing very quickly. You do need to pick tools that are appropriate for the time. And a lot of organizations don't have a data warehouse yet. That may be, at 2x, 3x growth from where they're at right now. I think it's so important what you shared about tools like Power BI and Tableau offering a meaningful step even before the data warehouse is part of the picture.
Yeah, this is such an interesting topic to me because there's two sides of my, let's say, two chapters of my career here, right? So in my previous companies, right, I was the actual guy like building that out myself, like hands-on. And for me, it was amazing. Like the beginning of it, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, when Power BI was basically being born, it was amazing to see, hey, we can actually do all of that like in 5 minutes, that over the course of history, like you had to spend thousands of dollars building infrastructure, like data mining, like a bunch of things, right? For me, that was amazing. And it was incredible to see how simple and easy that was, right? So like you're pulling data from multiple sources, you're doing transformations. Obviously, you have to do it in the right way. And this is the tricky point. Not everybody builds this thinking of scalability, and that's the catch. But that was a point that I experienced myself, like getting the visibility in first things first. At DocPlanner, it's a different scenario. We have, an organization very strong in terms of data. So we have a data warehouse plus a BI team that many companies would envy. So that's amazing. As soon as I joined, I was like, wow, this is awesome. Our pain and our issue is prior to that is just around that CRM migration. So our processes are still being unified because of the history of the company, because previously it was the startup motion, separate countries operating in different ways, right? So basically we're in the motion of fixing that, but we already are like many, many steps ahead in terms of the data infrastructure. And BI for us is just like simply visualization, like building charts, because the data is already normalized. And for us in ops, that is like a dream coming true.
I actually want to ask one final question around BI to both David and Gabriel. David, you've mentioned several times that companies come in and think about BI too late or bring on a BI tool too late. Gabriel, you've worked in a whole variety of companies, and you've just described some of them. They had these full-blown teams already. Is there a time you've seen where it is essential, or maybe what kinds of signals should we look out for as a company is growing to say, hey, I think this is actually the right time to bring in a BI tool? This is for both of you.
Did I go first, David?
Yeah, I'm going to say almost right away. As soon as you have a financial system and you have a CRM and you have other tools that you want to report across, you have some complexity. But clearly there are, to Gabriel's point earlier of choosing the simplest tool for the job at the time, there are different levels of BI tools out there. Some are more turnkey, some are much more sophisticated. But Gabriel, I'd love to hear what you think.
I 100% agree. I think the only catch is you have to obviously be wary not to buy a very expensive tool at the beginning. Like if you're early on company, just be aware of that. But that being said, some of these tools, they have decent pricing. And for me, it would be the sooner the better. Like for me, as soon as David mentioned, as soon as you have two systems instead of one, that is the time that you need to start connecting the dots. So do that at that time, because further down the road, it's going to be much easier.
And that's probably earlier than a lot of teams are thinking about BI. They're like, oh, I've just got two systems. I'm sure I can do this in Excel spreadsheets.
Exactly.
Great. My last question around kind of the RevOps function before we really dive into your very interesting background is thinking ahead around the developments and the trends in the industry of RevOps and the RevOps as a functional area. What do you think will be the next big disruption to the RevOps function?
Mm-hmm. That's such a great question. And again, I wish I had like the perfect answer to this, and I don't. But here are two things I can say about the future of RevOps, right? So one for me is the future is already here. That's one of the things we should acknowledge. Like we've been dreaming of RevOps being elevated, and now we can see that's the case. Like mostly pushed maybe by the economic outlook, but still the case. 2023 seems to be like the year. The second note I'll say is the growth of the function internationally. So there's a lot of maturity in the function of RevOps concentrating, in North America. And the function is like still arriving in a way to Europe and Latin and other countries. I'm starting to see the function bubble up. So there's a lot of senior hires here and there, but still there's a lot of a lot of steps to evolve there. Beginning with the question that you asked at the beginning, like, what's the definition of RevOps? Like, what does it mean for you? I see this all the time. If I ask somebody who's based in North America, obviously I'm generalizing, you tend to get a more consistent answer versus in Europe, it might be that people actually think they understand, but that's not the case. So there's a lot of education, even for people who are looking to join companies and have a RevOps role. For me, my advice would be, don't assume that people understand. You have to focus on education, right? Because of simply the state of the function, right? Disruption specifically, I think now, technology is getting, to a whole new level. So actually, like with the advancement of AI, this is going to get, to a level, that is unheard of and unforeseen. So for me, that is not too far out from where we are.
Wow, I'm excited for the standardization of the term RevOps, because I don't even think in North America we mean the same thing. I think company to company, there's still massive differences. Forrester has some great data on this, on how it's often between the spectrum of the alliance of the willing and essentially organized team. And on this podcast alone, we've seen folks who define RevOps as primarily a glorified function of sales ops, kind of taking on those shoes and having some more cross-functional management to incorporate marketing ops all the way to customer success ops, et cetera. So I do think that variance is going to continue. I'd love to shift, actually, Gabriel, to talk a little bit more about you. I want to make sure we've got time for folks to learn from your background, which is so exciting. You are currently based out of Barcelona in Spain. And prior to that, you went to school in Sao Paulo. You were at the Methodist University there. You got your BA in communication and advertising. And then you got your MBA from the Pontifical Catholic University in Sao Paulo. I'd love to understand, how did you get to, your current role, your prior roles? You've also been heads of sales ops at several positions. Give me a sense of, what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. So if my life was a Netflix series, I would divide this into 3 seasons, I guess. So the first chapter or first season would be, me simply figuring out what I'm good at and then building my work ethic. The second would be, really experiencing, a huge growth in the function. So actually joining RevOps, sales ops at the beginning, and then mastering the basics of customer data and visibility and tech stack. That would be kind of the second chapter there. And then the final one would be the formal transition from sales ops to RevOps. And I'll cover that in a bit more detail, right? So definitely on me personally, I was born and raised in Sao Paulo, Brazil, decided to move abroad. So my wife and I decided to move to Barcelona many years ago, settled, and that was kind of a personal decision that ultimately, coincidentally or not, brought me into the role of RevOps. So I joined an early stage Canadian software company. Back in the days, the company was founded by 3 people. 2 out of them were based in Calgary, and 1 out of them previously was living in Calgary, but he was, at the moment he was in Barcelona. And at that point of time, I was just recently moved. I had just recently moved. I was working at another company, and one day, out of the blue, I decided to just basically drop. I wasn't happy with the function that I had. Typically, previously in living in Sao Paulo, I was very stressed, and I was looking for something more, work-life balance. And after having spent a few weeks in a new company in Barcelona, just recently arrived, I was like at the limit there. So I decided basically to leave that company. And in the very same day, I hopped on LinkedIn, and then I found this role, like sales operations analyst, which I have to be honest, I didn't know what it was. Like I had no clue. I was like, okay, this is a sales analyst. Fine. It's close to it, but I had no I didn't understand actually sales ops, right? And then the very next day I got a call and then did interviews and I got hired. For me, I'm personally grateful for that moment of kind of struggle and transition, and especially to that person who hired me and who ultimately became my mentor, because that guy was a senior executive with tons of experience who ultimately instilled a lot of knowledge in me in terms of ops in general. Right. So that's kind of the first chapter there, like building that work ethic and etc. Then the second one was throughout those years at that, small company that ultimately became a very successful global business. It was all about, really mastering the basics, really going into, how can I not only do what I like or do what I love, but also deliver people value. Like, how can I deliver the company value? And I was starting to do those quarterly meetings with my boss, like every quarter, proactively setting expectations. And that ultimately paid off, and then the company became really successful, and I grew alongside that, right? And then the final one was the transition to RevOps. A lot of people are still confused with that definition, right? So that's something that I talk a lot about on LinkedIn. And one point of time, I perceived that there was a need for the company that we were operating at. So we needed to make the shift. It was more about how can we unify the operational functions and make this a true revenue operations machine. And that's kind of the current episode or season that I'm living at DocPlanner. So formally joining the role, building that global function, and still making a lot of mistakes and still talking to a lot of people out there to help guide me. It is still to be seen what's going to happen in the future.
We're excited for that future. We've been talking about DocPlanner the whole time. Can you give folks understanding of what DocPlanner does?
Yeah, DocPlanner is an amazing company. It's a company founded, in Poland, but currently it is a global business. The vision is to make the healthcare experience more human. So you have all these companies, Airbnb, Uber, who are basically the economics of collaboration. And when it gets to healthcare, we, in a lot of the countries, we struggle a lot. Obviously, this is going to depend on your region and your country, but like whenever you have to find a doctor or a clinic, it's very hard to do that, without having to pick up your phone and then call 1,000 people, and still having to go to that visit and be frustrated sometimes, depending on the case. So this is really what the business is doing, is something unique, is connecting doctors to patients and patients, to clinics and hospitals and etc., building meaningful software to help them manage their day-to-day. And for me, it's the time, at the time to happen. Like, we're living that transition, and I'm so excited to be part of it.
If you could go back to earlier in your career and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
I'll definitely, say I would give myself 3 pieces of advice, because as I said, I made a lot of mistakes. The one would be play the long game, right? So that is something that, it didn't take me long to learn, but I wish I learned sooner. You guys probably have heard of, or people watching this podcast have heard of Pavilion, the Pavilion community, and its founder and CEO, Sam Jacobs, just launched a book called Kind Folks Finish First. He talks a lot about, giving and not thinking about the short term, right? And for me, that is an advice that I would have taken much sooner in my career. Like, think of the long term, bigger picture there. The second would be, I am not as amazing as I think I am. So be humble, but at the same time, no one is ready. So I'm not like, there's always this imposter syndrome, and you have to be comfortable with that. Like, we are all on the same boats. That's what I learned personally. So you have to strike that balance. Like, you're not as great, be humble, do the work, but at the same time, embrace it and take the leap.
So in an ideal world, what would what's on your career bucket list after all this success in RevOps?
For me, I'm probably biased to say that I simply love what I do. So for me, it's like I'm living the greatest age of RevOps in my point of view. I would love to continue to pursue that function and see how it grows even more. I don't have like a something that I wish I would do differently. It's more about where this goes from now, which I think it's hard to predict, and I'm happy to be a witness of that.
So you lead a global team, and without even digging into the specifics of that, I know that your email is just, and your Slack is just erupting at all hours. People are reaching out. I'm curious, like, what do you do to wind down? How do you unwind from the insanity of the role?
Great question. So, I mean, definitely for me, it's all about family and do the things that I love doing it, right? So, and they're interconnected. So first off, I am a proud dad of an 8-month old baby boy, and I have a beautiful wife together for the last 12 years. Not sure if that means like winding off, that he keeps me busy and he's super active, but I simply enjoy, and it's such a special moment. Secondly, for me, I am, and I should say, I am a very amateur YouTuber per se. So in the free time, whenever I have some free time, I enjoy posting some acoustic cover songs on YouTube. So just look up for my name over there. Don't expect anything great. That's my caveat. And then the final one would be, I just love learning, like whatever that is. I love learning languages. I love learning, I don't know, riding a horse. I love learning whatever whatever is challenging. I'm kind of obsessed with that.
One of our final last questions for you, Gabriel. You've mentioned, you've referenced having that first manager who hired you, that first executive who hired you, who became your mentor. You've mentioned your involvement in Pavilion. We'd love to hear, who are some of the RevOps folks you admire in the industry right now? People you'd love to shout out. And also, what are some of those go-to resources you use to keep furthering and advancing your RevOps learning?
Great question. So definitely a few people to call out here. The first one would be, I think, Dana Therian. I don't know if he was already mentioned on this podcast, but if not, he should.
We know and like Dana very well. Wonderful guy.
Then that is an amazing guy that people should definitely know. So VP of Sales Advisory at Anaplan, and he's got probably the longest title ever that I've seen out there. I don't know if anybody in the industry or in the world has such an amazing title like him. Let me look it up. I think it's Member Certified Sales Compensation Exam Item Writers Cohort. That sounds just lovely. I need to ask the guy what that is all about. But Dana, big fan of the guy. We connected a while ago, and he helped me a lot in terms of advice. A couple of others would be, for me, Rob Dandorf. So he's a VP of RevOps at Pavilion. Also a guy that I connected, a couple of years ago and helped me a lot. And the final one, I don't know him personally, but I follow him on LinkedIn, and he's got some great piece of advice. His name is Rob Levy. So Levey. The guy is simply, one of those gems in terms of sharing advice for RevOps, right?
Really amazing stuff. Last but not least, I know you are probably an inspiration to not only me sitting here, but lots of other folks listening on this podcast. Where can people find you online if they'd love to follow you and see what you're up to as of late?
It depends on whether they want to be disappointed. So if that's the case, they go to YouTube, and then they think they're going to find something great there, but it is not that great. So YouTube would be one, but definitely LinkedIn is the main channel. So reach out to me, connect there. I love exchanging some knowledge about RevOps.
Great. And if folks would like to learn more about DocPlanner, and also if they would be interested in joining your global team, where should they be looking?
Definitely, if it is about one of the roles that I mentioned on this episodes, reach out to me on LinkedIn, or in general, if you're interested in joining DocPlanner, just go to docplanner.com/careers. There's a number of roles, interesting roles over there, and you can easily apply.
Gabriel, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. I have so many takeaways from today's session, whether it's the thought of busy not being the same as effective. We obviously had this kindred spirit moment of suggesting to invest in BI as soon, much earlier than people think, even as soon as having just 2 systems to report across. Also, that advice that you shared from Pavilion about playing the long game is just so meaningful. I can't wait to go back and listen to this episode just to think back through all these great examples you gave. So thank you so much for joining us. Really just a pleasure to meet you, spend this time with you today.
For me, it has been such an amazing pleasure. And again, I will say that I admire a lot of work that you guys are doing here, and I encourage everybody to follow, across all platforms here. I am personally a big fan, so I hit the follow button, across everything that you guys posted out there. I am excited to see, again, the future of the function. And personally, I'm just scratching the surface. I know that perhaps I know 10% of it. A lot of us are kind of still trying to figure this out, as we go. And this is a great tool. Like a podcast like this is a great way of sharing knowledge. So really, really appreciate what you guys are doing here.
And listeners, you heard it from Gabriel, not just from us. Go subscribe to the podcast, tell a colleague about it, tell someone who's coming up in RevOps about it. We'd love to be able to build this community of this RevOps hub and to keep sharing the knowledge so that we can stand on each other's shoulders. Thank you again, Gabriel, for such an informative, gem-filled episode, sharing your experiences across international companies in RevOps.
Thank you so much.
And this has been another exciting episode of RevOps Rockstars. See you next time.
Stay classy, rock stars.
Wait, you didn't think the podcast was over, did you? After all this talk with Gabriel about his amateur musician hobby on YouTube, you didn't think we would share with you a little snippet of what he plays? Check out Ever Wonder, an original song by Gabriel Rustice, as our special outro for this episode. Enjoy.
And that wraps up another episode. Thank you so much for joining us. For show notes and other episodes, visit RevOpsRockstars.com. RevOps Rockstars is sponsored by OpFocus. Visit opfocus.com to learn more about how OpFocus helps SaaS companies scale their revenue operations.